medieval torture devices, a lady of questionable moral standing, perverted streakers, operatic phantoms, the home of Dracula, not giving a fudge and running free. Way back in 1980, a new band on the scene would release an album that would start a career that would see them go to the top of the metal genre. It's Iron Maiden, with Iron Maiden. So, the debut Iron Maiden album, released on April 14th, 1980. The album that would start a career that still goes on to this day, and a very, very good career it's been for them, and a very good career. Very brief history before we get into it, I suppose. What's prompted this review is that Maiden have just re-released their first 4 albums, so Iron Maiden, Killers, Number of the Beast and Peace of Mind, as remastered editions. I think these were the remasters that they did in 2015, especially for iTunes, and they've now put those on CD. They're pretty much bare bones, original kind of, the original sleeve designs, etc., and the original track listings. So on this review there will be no inclusion of Sanctuary, which appeared on later ones, and to be honest, I don't really care about the remaster. It sounds fine. It sounds great. I don't really notice a huge amount of difference, apart from it's a little louder, and it's another excuse for me to do a classic album review. So the band was formed on Christmas Day 1975 by one Mr. Steve Harris, and the name of the band came after Steve watched a film adaptation of The Man in the Iron Mask, based on the novel by Alexander Dumas. Steve said that it reminded him a little of the Iron Maiden mask torture device. Strange mind. Anyone who's interested in the history of the band, I highly recommend you check out the Early Years documentary. You can see it on YouTube easy enough. It's fair to say that the band went through multiple lineup changes before they got to this album. They started creating a buzz around town. They performed at a pub called the Cart and Horses. More and more people just kept coming back to see them. Word spread. They also handed in a 4-song demo to a guy named Neil Kay, who owned a heavy metal club, basically, called the Bandwagon Heavy Metal Soundhouse. I think initially he was kind of shrugged the bands off, but as soon as he heard the tape he absolutely loved it, put it in rotation in the club, and that soon gained a lot more recognition from a wider audience. And later the same demo would be released as the now infamous Soundhouse tapes. The band would end up signing with EMI in December of 1979, and they geared up to start recording this album. And the lineup for this particular album is Paul Di'Anno on vocals, Steve Harris, of course, on bass, Dave Murray on guitars, Clive Burr on drums, and we get the one and only time that Dennis Stratton performs on an album on guitar. Now the production on this one is a little raw, which is fair enough. It's a debut album. Steve Harris in particular was not a fan. In fact, I don't think he's a fan of the album in general, especially because it contains. It's got a very punkish feel to it. Both some of the songs have a few more punk elements in them, and the rawness of it. And Paul Di'Anno's vocals in particular have more of a gruff sort of a street vibe to them. But many Maiden fans cite this as their absolute favourite, including members of Pantera and Metallica, etc. And I got to say, I got a special place for it in my heart as well. I really do. I love the Dickinson era, but there's something endearing about this era of the band as well. One more thing before I get into the songs. There's no way that I can do a review about Iron Maiden without mentioning the cover artwork done by Derek Riggs, who would be a long-time collaborator with the band. He's done many album covers and artwork in general for the band, featuring of course Eddie the Ed. I think this album was originally done for a punk band, or it's supposed to be for a punk album, which explains the spiky hair. But once the band saw this artwork, they just loved it immediately, and it really fits well with the band. I mean, obviously it's Eddie the Ed. Supposedly the artwork itself was actually inspired by a picture that Derek saw of a decapitated Vietnam vet, I think it was, although he did actually question whether the picture was real or whether it was just some sort of form of propaganda. But yes, hence the decomposed features. And with that, let's get into the songs. Opening track, Prowler. We get that unmistakable opening riff with a hint of wah-wah.
Wow, 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 wow.
Essentially, this song is about a flasher who lies in wait for a unsuspecting victim. Well, you see me crawling through the bushes with it open wide. What you seeing, girl? Can't you believe that feeling? Can't you believe it? Can't you believe your eyes? It's the real thing, girl. This one features a lot of what would go on to be trademark Maidenisms. Steve Harris's amazing bass playing standing out above a lot of the instrumentation a lot of times, really taking centre stage a lot of it. We get those twin guitar harmonies. I believe the band were very inspired by bands like Wishbone Ash. There's hints of Thin Lizzy in this as well, for sure. Some great lead playing and driving drum work. The bridge section of the song features a much more punk-like riff, which this sort of thing does appear a few times on this album, but pretty much by the time we get to the second album, Killers, that is pretty much completely gone. We go into much more of the Iron Maiden that we know today, but that's for a later review. I think I said earlier that I'm a big fan of the Dickinson era of Maiden, of course, but there is something very special about the Paul Di'Anno era as well. His vocal range is far greater than people give him credit for, I believe. He can actually hit some pretty high notes. He's a very decent singer. Don't know what he's like nowadays so much. I haven't really checked much of his stuff out lately, but it has to be said that his voice does fit these songs. Great start to a classic album. Up next we have Remember Tomorrow. And this one starts out with a melancholic bass line from Harris before we get some very heartfelt, vulnerable sounding vocals from Di'Anno. Unchain the colours before my eyes, yesterday's sorrows, tomorrow's white lies. Scan the horizon, the clouds take me higher. I shall return from out of thee. Oh. I just want to read out an interview that I read with Paul as well, because apparently originally this was about his grandfather. That was about my grandfather. I lost him in 1980 when I was on tour. He was a diabetic. They cut off his toe and his heel, then he lost his leg from the knee down, and he just sort of gave up. But the lyrics don't relate to it, to be honest with you, just the words remember tomorrow, because that is what he always used to say. That was his little catchphrase. You never know what is going to happen. Remember tomorrow. It might be a better day. So I just kept it in, and that was that. There's a heavier section that kicks in for the chorus, and we get the first of that real trademark gallop that kicks in after the second chorus. We get some great lead work, and we get a real new wave of British heavy metal style riff that I'm sure would turn out to be very influential to bands like Metallica, especially from their Kill 'Em All era. I really love this song. It's got a lot of dynamics, kind of ebbs and flows, and I really like Paul's vocals on this song as well. I think it really showcases what he could do. Next track, one of my favourites, Running Free. Very quickly, it's worth mentioning the artwork to this single as well. I think this was the first single that was released, or at least it was the first where we get to see Eddie, although in this artwork he's at the back of an alleyway with somebody running away from him. I think he's wielding a broken bottle as well. We don't know who this figure is, but then when we get to see the cover of the album, it all makes perfect sense. Quite clever, that. This one starts out with a rolling drum line before Harris joins in on the bass and another sort of punkier guitar riff, I guess. This is probably my favourite on the album, and it's still a live favourite to this day. And I guess essentially this is an autobiographical piece by Paul Di'Anno, who was a bit of a wild chap. Spent the night in an LA jail and listened to the sirens wail. They ain't got a thing on me. I'm running wild, I'm running free. And Paul actually said of this album, Running Free is about me as a kid. My mum ruled my life, but she said to me, you live in a shit area, but do what you can do and see what happens. As long as you don't hurt anybody, just get on with it. But I did get into trouble with the law a few times, and that's the only thing I wish I could change. The grief I gave my poor mama. Pretty self-explanatory lyrics on this one, I think. We get some more twin harmony guitar sections, very Thin Lizzy sounding, and the chorus is just absolutely awesome. Great song, classic Maiden song, classic metal song, classic song, full stop. Don't have to categorise it. Next up we get Phantom of the Opera, which is based on the French novel of the same name by Gaston Leroux. Don't you hate it when people emphasise a foreign accent like they're somehow cultured? Gaston Leroux. Bruce Dickinson has gone on to say that if you don't like this song, chances are you don't get Iron Maiden. I think this was one of the first standout songs that he heard from the band, Apparently he was with Samson at the time, and Maiden were on the same bill. He heard this song and really realised that nobody else in metal was doing this sort of thing. I guess maybe hearing this song, Bruce was already thinking that he could play a part in this band. I'd say that this is the first song on this album that probably feels like Maiden as we know it today. Really showcases everything that we know about them: galloping riffs, the twin harmonies, the progressive sections, the instrumental sections. And this is the sort of thing that will act as a blueprint for many of the up and coming metal acts, especially bands from the Big Four, etc. I'm running and hiding in my dreams, you're always there. You're the Phantom of the Opera, you're the devil, you're just out to scare. You damage my mind and my soul, it just floats through the air. You haunt me, you taunt me, you torture me back to your lair. There's a lengthy instrumental section in this which goes through all sorts of riffs and changes. We get a bass solo of sorts, I guess, a very prominent bass section with Steve, and more impressive lead work before returning to the same style of the opening section. Great opening riff as well, I should have said that. Next up we get Transylvania, of course named after the home of Count Dracula from the Bram Stoker novel. There was an interview with Steve Harris where he said the initial idea on this one was to have lyrics. It originally had a melody line for the vocal, but then we played it, it sounded so good as an instrumental that we never bothered to write lyrics for it, which is lazy. A lot of trademark Maidenisms appearing in this one once again. The twin guitar harmonies feature very prominently in it. It's not a bad instrumental, but when you compare it to some of the stuff that Metallica did, for instance, kind of lacks that certain something, but still a good tune and fits on the album. Next up we have Strange World, and I really love this song. This one starts out with a very haunting, atmospheric, clean guitar that builds into a lengthy instrumental section. I think it's a good, I think it's the best part of 2 minutes before Paul joins in on this one. I've got to say I really enjoy his performance on this. Stalks of light come from the ground. When I cry there isn't a sound. All my feelings cannot be held. I'm happy in my strange new world. Shades of green grasses twine. Girls drinking plasma wine. A look at love, a dream unfolds. Living here, you'll never grow old. I think there's a bit of a debate as to what the lyrics truly mean on this one, but some people think that as it follows Transylvania, perhaps this is following that vampire bit, especially with the plasma wine part, plasma of course being blood or something. But I guess it could also be describing like a dreamscape and I don't know, maybe drug induced. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't write it. Really good song though. Next up we've got Charlotte the Harlot, the first of the Charlotte saga. I think there were 4 songs altogether chronicling the escapades of this lady of ill repute. The other songs being 22 Acacia Avenue, Hooks in You, and From Here to Eternity. This song was written almost entirely by Dave Murray. I think there's a bit of dispute as well as to whether Charlotte is actually based on a real person or not. I think Dave said that it is, but I don't know. Despite being written almost entirely by Dave, there's a very prominent bass line in the opening riff. Paul in particular sounds great on this song, and this really, and I guess the subject matter and the delivery really kind of suits his style. Taking so many men to your room, don't you feel no remorse? You charge them a £5, it's only for starters, and 10 for the main course. And you've got no feelings, they died long ago. Don't you care who you let in? And don't you know you're breaking the law with the service you're giving? Classic Maiden tune. And then we get the final song on the album, the self-titled Iron Maiden, along with Running Free. This is by far my favourite on the album. We get the opening riff, the Harris bass line. This is a fun song that I guess could have multiple meanings. Of course, you've got the name of the band, you've got the name of the torture device that it's named after. They originally had the Iron Maiden stage prop, which used to drip blood from its mouth for the album close when they were still performing in pubs. And also I guess it's a rallying call, Iron Maiden declaring their dominance and saying that they're here for good and they're here to stay. Oh well, wherever you are, Iron Maiden's gonna get you no matter how far. See the blood flow, watching it shed up above my head. Iron Maiden wants you for dead. Fantastic song and a great close to a fantastic debut album. Now, of course, after this album, the band would go on to stratospheric heights. They do one more album with Paul Di'Anno, Killers, which went much more into metal territory, more of the progressive vibe. Then after that, for the classic Number of the Beast album in '82, they recruited the air siren himself, Bruce Dickinson. And I think we pretty much all know what happened after that. And they did many great albums with him also. Some shit ones, but it has to be said that the debut does hold a special place in a lot of people's hearts, including mine. Just has that rawer, punkier, street vibe to it. There's just something very pleasing about this album. I've really enjoyed listening to this one again all this week. But yes, suffice to say that we are getting towards the end of the year now, and the album release is starting to dry up a touch. So I think that's a perfect time for me to start doing the unsigned bands, and I'm going to do a few more classic album reviews, I think. But yeah, the first unsigned band review will be going out next week, and also next weekend, the 25th of November, will be my first year anniversary of the channel. Yeah, I've been doing this for a year now, and I'm very happy with how it's been going, so I will be doing a video for that. So I hope all of you tune in for that one, and then we'll see where we go from there. But